That record was an awkward moment in Evoken's recording history because we had just lost our bass player. Actually, we asked him to leave. But, so I had to play bass. Dario had left the band, but he had some songs written already, so we needed to find a keyboard player to play his parts and to write the rest of the record. So it was very like a mixed up type of recording where like I had to learn how to like really lay down a bass track the right way. So it is a little different than playing guitar. And we experimented with different sounds on that album. Like the clean sounds that Nick got were created by Ron Thal, Bumblefoot Thal, the God. Anyway, he created sounds on like a Line 6 amplifier, which we never really did before. We always used, try to go as organic as we can. And that's why that album sounds a particular way, especially with the snare sound. But it came out really sick, and it seems to be everyone's favorite. A lot of people love that record. And it's very oppressive, like you said. And we did pay disembowelment royalties. Ha ha ha. Just kidding. But anyway, that record, it's a long one. It's like I'm not sure how to get through it in one listen. Even the guy who wrote it can't do it. So my hat's off to people who really enjoy that record.
That was In Solitary Rune and In Pestilence Burning. And so long songs here is what we're talking about. I come back to the question. Here's what I wrote out, Albert, to ask you later in the episode. I said, how much Evoken is a safe amount to listen to in preparation for the show? Because I listen to a lot. And should I inject some Blind Guardian or Running Wild into my veins to sort of counteract the Evoken? So I thought that was a clever question that I wrote at 2 a.m. last night. But in hindsight, not so much. So I apologize.
It's a relevant question, but I think the beauty of Evoken is that they're not a one trick doom pony, and that they're seemingly, if you're not paying close attention, you might think, oh, this is just all fucking 12-minute doom songs, and it is. But they're different shades of what they bring over the years, and I think that you can. If you start your journey at Shades Night Descending and you end it at the most recent album, it's just even though that red journey, even though that red line is there between everything, it's a completely different sound at the end. Yeah. So I think it's okay. I think okay. I think it'd be more painful to listen to 6 hours of Slayer, to be completely honest with you.
Yeah, could be, or Marduk, as Mark was alluding to, or something like that. Yeah. I mean, and speaking of kind of this sort of like variety and stuff like that, we get this incredible title track. One of the highlights of this show, and in my journey, I really discovered a love of this song, and I wrote a lot. So I'll just share with the two of you kind of what I said about Antithesis of Light. I said, unpenetrable beauty turning to bleak, bitter darkness in that opening salvo. When that twin guitar overtake at like the 140 mark with full oppressive onslaught, it's some pretty suffocating stuff before releasing you finally about the 3-minute mark. Then you get some of the new keyboard player, Denny Han is his name, are very on point, and they really intersect and blend with the My Dying Bride riffs that are kind of like all throughout this song, while John shatters you with his deep growls. I said there's lots of cool tempo shifts here. The lyrics are talking about how our universe continues to expand and that we'll eventually become nothingness, or the antithesis of light. Just fucking a very cool subject matter, and cool for a metal song, especially doom. And I said when that bride riff reappears at the 9-minute mark, I'm full. I like last night at like 1 a.m. ratings, I was like full headbanging. I was like, whoa. I'm fucking headbanging to an Evoken song. It really hit me.
Well, and Jason's got hair now too. So
I have some hair now too, so I can actually headbang. And Vince's intensity just keeps increasing, and then ushers in this like a burst of solos, which is like really rare, but like also really like refreshing at the end of like such an epic song. And it's one of the best stretches of the whole record, and really of the whole era of them. And in particular, what I'm getting from the end of this song, this is where I heard a lot of from Darkest Skies, from My Dying Bride, from Angel in the Dark River. Like, you know how that song, like everything kind of coalesces at the end, like the keyboards and all of it, and it just like,
there's something
it fucking hits you, and that's how I feel. At the end of the
song, like something reminds me of something a lot, but I couldn't think of what it was.
If you go back and listen to the end, it's very great. Similar, like from Darkest Skies, something in that ilk, I think, but that's what I sort of grabbed onto.
The beginning gave me some Terminator vibes as far as the keyboards were concerned.
Ooh, okay.
Which is always good.
Yeah. Like cold, kind of early 80s.
Yeah.
Mark and I were actually watching Terminator on TV when we vacationed with Chris and his wife a couple weeks ago.
It was like the best TV station ever. It was. We were just watching like
Sanford and Son,
Return of the Jedi,
Return of the Jedi, and Terminator all on one TV. I mean,
Christ.
Yeah.
It was like my childhood all over again. Yeah.
That's incredible.
I just wish there were Three's Company in between. So that would be the only palette.
We did have someone come and knock at our door though.
Oh my God. All right. Done with that. So that's kind of my takeaway on that title track. Is it's one of my favorite Evoken songs. It really kind of hit me different last night when I was kind of putting some things together. So so I just wanted to share that with you guys. So I appreciate.
I'm glad you did.
Hey, I'm glad.
Wonderful.
And then
the show's about sharing.
Yeah, and then we get to Caress of Light. which, Albert's alluded to as kind of a companion piece to this. This is Nick's final full length. He'll do the split in 2010. You've got, new bass player. They're all sharing keyboard duties. And John will kind of comment on that in the clip. So they don't really have a full-time keyboard player. So there's less keyboards. There's no cello player. It's definitely more guitar oriented. They've left Avant-Garde and signed with this new label, I Hate Records. It just really feels like the end of an era. Especially with the band and with Nick being one, the founder who's about to leave. And it's a different record. I said, the record's, it's less interesting at times, sometimes because of the loss of some of those atmospherics. I don't hate it. I still think it's a really killer record, but I can kind of sense Nick's frustration with the doom scene maybe on this record and some of the things he said, which I'll share in a second. But I don't know. Do you think that, like Nick was just at his wit's end? Like it just, it was like they were like running in place all the time and never really getting anywhere? Or I don't know, do you have any vibes about why he decided to walk away from a band he founded? Or
I think there has to be a level of frustration after, 15 or so years, if you go all the way back to Funerus to where they are with Across of the Void. And it is I think I Hate Records is still around. We worked with them briefly, or we worked with them here and there over the years. They definitely leaned heavier on the doom side of things. So they were in some ways a decent partner for Evoken. But again, it was this like just total almost invisibility in North America for the band. I think it was distributed through Mercenary Music or something, like some fucking fly-by-night label. I could take a walk over and check it out after I stopped talking. But I also wonder if just like Nick had just kind of run his creative well dry, because while I think he has been involved in some stuff since then, here and there,
like other bands, or
well, he was. I think he was like. I think there was a Funebrarum record that he contributed to after that, but like there hasn't really been any like big projects that he has helmed since then. So it's. I mean, I used to talk to Nick fairly regularly. I haven't spoken to him or seen him in ages. But I don't know where his head is at in terms of kind of like exiting Evoken at this point or after the release of this album. But it does seem like there's a despair to this album that maybe isn't present on the other Evoken records, where there's a starkness to it, where there's there was a certain hopelessness obviously with Across of the Void or I'm sorry, Antithesis.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But like to this, like you said, it's like kind of some of those more majestic elements have been removed, and it is just kind of a darker experience overall. So yeah, I don't know, but obviously this is like that. This record marks a significant end.
Yes.
Of an era for this band, because I mean Nick was the main songwriter. Mm-hmm. I think there was a lot of, I know as a fan, after he left, there really was a big question of like, can this band really even continue? In my mind, like how is it gonna sound? How are they gonna evolve? And it wasn't so much doubting what like Vince and John could do, as much as it just was like, what is it going to be?
Yeah, what's it going to sound like?
And again, I don't want to just like move on to the next era immediately, but it is there's a certain finality that comes with this record that I think needs to be addressed.
Well, I have some potential insight that comes from a resource you might be familiar with, and I think you were one of the people that was part of the interview from Decibel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's from Nick. I've stitched together a couple issues worth of kind of comments, and again,
we need one of those
investigative journalism. But he says, this is not something we're in for the money or for the fame. I just can't make Evoken a full-time job. He says this in 2005. He says at every Evoken show, there are like 10 people. Half of them are the people you see at all the gigs, which is cool, but there's no new faces. People don't care. We're not going to pull all of our effort into it, or put all of our effort into it, for like 10 people and get $20. And he said that in Decibel number 9. And then 30 issues later, he bemoans, I always thought Evoken could have been much more successful if we were based in Europe. Some were born too late. I think we were born, some were born too late. I think we were born too west. And so it's this idea that like, you can almost like feel the despair in him. Like he's like at the like end of his rope with like this band. And as you said, there's a sound that sort of captures in Caress a Void that's it's just more bleak in it. And that's weird to say for Evoken because they have some bleakness in a lot of their DNA and stuff. But yeah, it lacks some of the majesticness that you sort of suggested in the last two records. I mean, even the song we're going to hear from Caress a Void of Purest Absolution, you know, this is probably one of the more brighter tunes. It's got some shimmering kind of underwater kind of psychedelic tones in some of the guitars, but it also has like a real unsettling, like triptych monotheist kind of like feel, you know, that you hear in like the newer Godin record a little bit too, you know.
Even like the opener of Purest Absolutions, like an Immortal Rights, like backwards playing.
Yeah.
You know, the stupid thing is when I heard that, I wrote the note down that I listened to all of Altars of Madness.
Oh shit! So you stopped that song and went and like,
and then I continued my notes. Yeah,
Jesus,
that record's just, I mean,
yeah, it's Altars.
Yeah,
I mean, there's even some like hate fueled like Electric Wizard riffs and things like that that you get like at the very beginning and at the kind of the end of the song. So maybe it's an anomaly of a song compared to like the rest of the record. I picked this one out because to me it like stands out a little bit and it gives a little bit of a hint for maybe where they might be heading songwriting wise in the next decade or whatever. But it's a record I don't like find myself really going back to very much. Across the Void.
It's I find that after after he left, that's where I'm more into Evoken.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure you're not alone.
It comes more into my sensibilities at that point.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the stuff we're about to talk about is very much like it's a new beginning, as Albert, you know, you kind of alluded to it here. So, yeah. Any other thoughts on either of these two records, Antithesis or Caress, before we kind of dive into this?
Let's
get to the good stuff.
No, I mean,
I'm just kidding. We love all this stuff, but the stuff that I think, you know, like Mark alluded to, the stuff that seems to be, it's got like new vitality to it almost, you know.
Yeah, like, it just kind of hits my like sweet spots more.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Like again, not that Evoken have sold out. It's the idea that these are the commercial records coming up. Yeah. No, I do, but I do think that there is, you know, and I've blabbed about this for the past like 9 hours now. Like this idea that like they do have so many more colors that they're working with from their palette, and those, you know, those Antithesis and Caress of the Void, they're kind of like more about a reduction of those things.
Yeah.
Yep. Whereas
it's like Quietus was more like epic, and then they just start stripping those elements away on the next couple records.
And I mean, I fucking love it. But it is like it's a different, you know, part of the reason the whole catalog works in this, for me personally, in this way, is just because it does have this ebb and flow to it, where there's nothing that I could ever get tired of, because they are they are moving in and out of things.
Mhm.
And yeah, this is a huge moment and closure for the band, as Nick's final full length with them.
Yeah, well said. So let's get into it. We've got Antithesis of Light and they have Purest Absolution, and we're going to end with a tune that's going to kind of usher in a new era in a lot of ways. And Albert, I'm sure both Vince and John will talk a little bit about this third song we're going to hear, which is a Paradise Lost cover of Roddy Misery from the Decibel Flexi series, and we'll talk more about that when we come back. Enjoy.
Yes, Nick left for personal reasons. He's wanted to start a new life somewhere else. And he left after the split EP we made with Beneath the Frozen Soil. So he was there after Caress of the Void, just to clarify that. And we had no keyboard player. So any keys you hear on that record were done by Craig Pillard and myself and Nick. We each took, turns. Whoever felt it at the moment played some keys. And that's why it was so guitar driven, and we had no cello player. We didn't hire one at the moment. And we just tried to make the songs as interesting as we could without all the keyboard elements that were usually on our records. And that's why it came out the way it did. But I am proud of that record. Like, there's not one record I'm not proud of. I mean, hopefully as a musician, you do love everything that you make, because if you don't, that's a hard thing to deal with. You feel like a failure as a musician. But if you love everything, regardless of what people think, you're always going to be on top of your game.
when you're just starting out, either playing your instrument or just starting a band, you have bands that are your main influences. Everything you do at that point comes from these influences. The thought of not only just covering Paradise Lost and Rotting Misery, but to have the opportunity to go up on stage and play it with Greg, that the 16-year-old me is like passed out on the floor, big smile on my face. But again, I'm in a doom band, don't expect that to happen much more.
We were approached to do the Paradise Lost cover by Albert for the Decibel magazine vinyl that they were offering in their magazines, and it was not a hard song to craft because it was already written. We just pretty much just played it the way Evoken would play it, which really isn't too far off from the way Paradise Lost plays, especially with Chris in the band, because he already sounds like Gregor McIntosh on leads as it is. So it was really easy. I can easily sound like a singer from Paradise Lost, and so it was like really easy and not really too much of a stretch for us. We just made it thicker, heavier, tuned lower, a bit slower, and that's it.
That was Rowdy Misery from the Decibel Flexi series. And then we heard Of Purest Absolution from Across a Void and Antithesis of Light from the aforementioned Antithesis of Light from 2005. So Rowdy Misery, that's kind of a fun one, Albert, that you are kind of directly kind of involved in.
It's a cool song.
I mean, it's cool. You get this kind of perfect marriage between an originator and a band who continues to kind of carry the torch for that scene. You know, Paradise Lost isn't really doing, gothic, Lost Paradise style death doom anymore. They have aspects of it, but it's almost like Evoken's like the next generation kids, and they get to kind of, carry that torch with this cover and stuff like that. And John even kind of spoke to that, why the song works for them in one of the sound clips we just heard. And it's obviously slowed down with some kind of funeral keys,
it's
kind
almost
of
like
coming
a
in
third
a little bit.
slowed down, which is interesting.
Yeah. And by this point, we've got a new guitar player, Chris Molinari, doing some great kind of Gregorisms in there. He's replaced Nick Orlando. And then a new bassist also has joined. He joined around the time of the split that they did in 2010 with Beneath the Frozen Soil, and his name's Dave Wagner. So,
very nice man.
So how did this all come together on your end, and why PL, and what do you think about Chris and what he brings to the table with this kind of new sound that we're about to enter into? So just the floor is yours, since this is a Decibel exclusive Flexi series tune.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious, like, that Evoken could execute a PL cover without any problem. Traditionally, Evoken songs don't grow on trees. Like, there are wide gaps in the discography. And as just a super fan of the band, I really wanted them to contribute somehow to the Flexi series, but I kind of didn't have it in me to say, hey, you know how you take 5 years to make a record? Why don't you take an extra year and write us a song just for us?
Yeah.
So since I was unwilling to do that, I thought, it'd be cool if they can do a cover. I have a good relationship with Paradise Lost, so it's easy for me to get them to approve it without trying to soak us for a mechanical license for the publishing. So yeah, I just approached the Evoken guys and wanted to see if they were into it, and they were into it. And they managed to carve out some extra studio time after they had recorded Atra Morris. So they went in and did it, and I got, John would send me, now that I think about it, it was at one of the dates of the Decibel tour in 2012 that they were on, where I think I still have a CDR actually that either John or Vinny gave me that had a rough recording of the record or an unmastered version of the song. And yeah, it's just like fucking, of course they obviously nailed it. They know what they're doing with this style. But yeah, it was, again, it's just anything that we do with Evoken is born out of fandom first. Yeah. But as the band continued to gain notoriety and find a larger audience, being able to do these things within the construct of Decibel and having it make sense became easier and more obvious. So for them to be a part of the Flexi series didn't seem outlandish at that point in time. And it just ended up lining up that they were the Flexi in issue number 100.
Yeah. Very cool.
So honestly, that's pretty much it.
Yeah. And the cool story that you told earlier about Gregor performing with them and stuff to do this cover and things. So
yeah, I mean, shit like that's wild. I mean, I'm not like, there's no way to like kind of play that off as anything but like, oh wow, that's really cool that happened. And again, you know, every once in a while you're able to curate something or have a hand in something happening that feels like a moment that you'll just remember, and that's certainly one of them.
Oh, for sure. And then what do you think about Chris replacing Nick and what he sort of brings to the table that's different?
I mean, Chris is a melodic lead player. He's definitely handling the majority of the leads on the past couple records. I think he fits in perfectly with the band stylistically, with where they with kind of where they were evolving to. I don't know. I can't speak to the songwriting breakdown, how much he contributes to that, or how much of it is just John, Vinny, and Dave. I don't know, honestly. So I'm sure Don is involved in that too, the keyboardist. But as a unit, they seem to coalesce really well. Both on stage and on LP. Mm-hmm. But I mean, how much do you want to kind of just jump into the fact that, you know, this album is their first Profound Lore release, which is really, I know everybody, not everybody, I know people like to give us kind of credit for, helping raise the profile of the band, but you know, Chris Bruni signing them to Profound Lore is the biggest step forward that they could take profile wise. Going from a bunch of kind of like obscure European based labels who had a niche following to something like Profound Lore, which regularly have its releases reviewed in Pitchfork. Mm-hmm. It gave the band a certain amount of legitimacy in the eyes of people outside of the niche that were already interested in them.
Little cachet, extra cachet.
Yeah. All of a sudden, this band might be cool because they're on Profound Lore. So maybe we'll give this 70-minute like soul crushing doom record a chance because Profound Lore said it was cool and they know Pallbearer. So hey, let's check it out.
Yeah.
So shit like that is and those guys. I mean, again, I can't speak for John and Vince and their motivations, but I highly doubt that there was anything cynical in that sense of like, oh, we'll sign a Profound Lore and the cool people will hear us. I highly doubt that.
We'll get popular and trendy. Yeah,
that did not enter the equation. That became kind of a happy accident, I think, in some ways that more and more people paid attention to them.
Oh, for sure.
It's just the right label to kind of push what they want to do forward.
Right. So, I mean,
and it coalesced with like this advancement in songwriting or whatever, something that this new element that Chris and Dave or whatever was in the air brought to the table that and I guess for people, how would you describe the differences in Atra Moors compared to like what we've heard earlier in this episode?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, it's more melodic. Mm-hmm. There's a bit more space. There's a bit more. I think there are more elements that you could latch onto as a casual listener and again, that's not. I'm not just. I know I just mentioned Pallbearer, but I think that that's an interesting example to cite as a band that like somebody who might have the first Pallbearer record could hear Atra and go, "Hey, I'm into this too." Like that's not outside the realm of possibility. Whereas I don't think they would have heard A Caress of the Void, and if they did,
the same thing. Yeah,
I don't know if it would connect. So that is the development of just kind of more melodic elements, but without deviating from the actual base of the heaviness and the extreme doom element that is still at the core of what they do.
They weren't sacrificing anything.
No.
And this is a record that I remember I was kind of reliving this memory with Mark, where I think for back when we used to do best of shows, I think the last one we did was maybe best of 2012. And this was on there for me. And I remember kind of like telling Mark that I was going to put this on. And he was like, yeah, aren't they kind of like a boring kind of funeral doom band or whatever? And I played him a couple songs from this and he's like, oh, like it, you could just tell like whatever people's perceptions of what they thought Evoken was, whether it was true or not, are like kind of blown up with this record and with Hypnagogia, obviously.
Yeah.
And so it, like you said, it blazes like a new path for them if they want that, to get a new fan base or whatever, to connect with the younger, maybe more educated Doom fans that have finally come around to what they're doing rather than like Evoken bending to what people want.
It does. Yeah, it never seems like they've bent to what they think people want. It's like what they want to do.
Yeah,
and what they've wanted to do has appealed more to my sensibilities in the last 10 years now.
And I know I led with the idea that they were now on Profound Lore, but ultimately, if they didn't have a record like Atra Morris, it wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah, They did the work. Yeah, it wasn't Yep.
No, and I've got some things that were kind of said and written about this record. One is from John Darnielle, and it's in the top 100 Doom records of all time because this record weighed in at number 51, which is pretty good for a newer Doom record. And he said, Atra Morris offers some of the most dialed-in guitar tone you'll find anywhere in non-mainstream metal. It's also got tunes that put me in the mind of Celtic Frost, Mesmerized at 16 RPMs. Over the years, I've had phases with a lot of Doom bands, but few recent model acts beckon me back into the fog as persistently as Evoken. You can get properly lost inside Atra Morris. It's worth the trip. So that was a succinct way of kind of talking about, what this record kind of is kind of going on for this record in a certain sense. And it even showed up too in the 100 greatest metal albums of the decade in number 60 as well, which is pretty cool. And who wrote this? This is J. Andrew Zalke. That's not a name I'm as familiar with. Yeah. How long did he write for Decibel? Not very long.
He does mostly cite stuff, but he does contribute to the print version.
Some occasional things. Yeah. Yep. And he just said, Evoken's brilliance lies in their ability to take a seemingly simple set of musical tools and craft them into a unique experience that can mean so many things to different listeners. The mix of huge guitar riffs, both guttural and clean vocals, plodding drums, and depressing lyrics could very easily result in a cliche snooze fest. But instead, Evoken are capable of making something as life-affirming or death-affirming, as 2012's Atra Morris, an album of 8 tracks and 80,000 forms of sorrow. There's an indescribable joy that comes with the sad and climatic riff at the end of Descent into Chaotic Dream, which is a song we're going to talk a lot about here in a second. Recalling that friend you'll never see again, that time in your life that's long gone, or just the realization you've gotten several years older since you first heard this song. And that's the part that really like grabbed me when he wrote that, because I was like, fuck, man, he's onto something. There's something existential but yet spiritual and growth and there's all those things kind of going on. Yeah, there's a maturity kind of going on here. And he goes on to say, to wrap up, he says, Vince Verke and crew are masters at creating an immersive atmosphere, as evidenced by the hypnotic and crushing grim Eloquence, which is the other song we're going to be playing, and the fierce and oppressive and intrinsic divide. Songs like these showcase Evoken's ability to effectively use a mix of tempos as well, which rewards repeat listens and propels Atra Moors above the overwhelming majority of Funeral Doom releases. It's a gift to those who wish to embrace the emptiness at its best. Yeah, so it's probably been a while since you've heard some of these things. So
yeah, it's been a long time.
thought I'd share them with you,
Albert. This is your life.
Yeah, this is your life, Albert. Yeah. One other thing before I get to a more comedic take, but this is actually Vince's own words, kind of talking about the themes of this record, and this interests me incredibly as a history teacher. And he actually gives us a pretty long, succinct sound clip really about some things. More on Hypnagogia, but so I wanted to make sure that we hit on the fact that both these last two records they've done are really tied into very specific caustic events in human history, the Black Plague and World War I, and then the trench warfare and some of that. But Vince kind of says, I've always had a fascination with the Black Plague. I consider this album to be bipolar. It goes from anger to sadness and melancholy to the darkest depression you can think of. During the time period of the Black Plague, people would go through these emotions. In those days, they looked to everything to try and find an answer. There were stories of individuals seeing these robed figures just outside of villages, just with huge staffs and fog rolling out from that staff, and people thought that this was God's punishment on them. I know that's been used a million times before, the plague, but sometimes you have to ignore that and go with what best fits the music. And he says, everybody has ideas. We've always dabbled with melodic guitars on our previous records, but this time we wanted to see what we could do now that we had Chris in the band. It really made things exciting again. We know the future is really looking bright for us, if that is possible, if that is even possible with this kind of music. So, and he said those in the Best of 2012, where Evoken, this was the number 3 record behind Baroness and a band called Converge. So
I never heard of them.
Yeah, interesting. So I thought that gives you kind of some interesting perspectives on, what's kind of going on with this, like that it's about kind of what it's like to go through a plague. And there are these highs and lows, because there are moments probably of triumph, of survival. And there's also these moments of, just like bitter loss. And it's kind of all in this music in some way. And I'm not going to go through and dissect the lyrics or anything, but it's still like the feeling you get when you listen to a record like this. It's like Old Bride records. There's like moments of like triumph and like depression too, like built in, you know?
Well, I think that goes to their release schedule as well, that sometimes it takes years for you to make these kind of connections and to make them work for the music as well. If they were putting out records every year, they wouldn't have that kind of like insight, I don't think. Yeah.
What were you going to say, Albert? Sorry.
Sometimes you just need a global pandemic to tie it all together.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, so it's a big, I don't even call it a comeback record, because they never really went anywhere, but it's definitely a rebirth. Yeah. LL said it best. But I think it is this new generation discovering them. And I think that's one of the cool things about this record. And one of the songs we're going to play in a moment, we'll talk more about it from our perspective, Descent into Chaotic Dream, happened to appear in the issue 100 call and response, Albert, and I'm sure you know where this is going. And this is from your old friend, the always well-spoken,
Jeffrey Walker.
never cynical, never sarcastic, Jeff Walker from Carcass. And this was the first song that was played for him. And here's what he had to say. And some of it's brilliant, but in particular, I think you're going to love his final sentence. He says, it sounds like the Cocteau Twins with a drunken Tom Waits reading poetry over it. Doesn't get very frantic to me. It gets heavier later and sounds more like My Dying Bride after they turned style. After they'd heard Anathema's demo on the tour bus, who had in turn heard Paradise Lost demo.
Taking the piss, yes.
And here it is. Here's where he really takes a piss, and I apologize before I say this. Or possibly had just stolen a copy of. It's the sort of music that Albert Mudrin wets his panties for. So I thought, So if you want to record a personal diss track on Jeff right now, here's your opportunity to diss him back, and it will be immortalized for all of eternity.
Diss him about the little hat.
Yeah.
No,
Jeff.
I don't
Jeff
think
being Jeff.
I think Welcome to Carcass Country speaks for itself.
Yes. Oh, very well done.
I do have that.
Yeah, Mark and I both have that as a novelty.
I don't think it ever came out on LP, thankfully, but I do
now that I'll save it for Record Store Day 2020.
2027.
Hey man, that thing will sell like hotcakes. Just
after the third pandemic, that'll be coming out in Record Store Day.
Yeah. Oh shit.
Well, he'll never listen to this in a million years.
No. This is pretty funny. I came across that. I don't know how I caught that when
That's
I was
hilarious.
flipping through like issue 100 looking for source material, and I was like, oh shit, Jeff Walker's talking about Evoken. There we go. Gotta fucking share this. So this first tune, the pair of tunes we're going to hear, the aforementioned, as Mr. Walker alluded to, Descent into Chaotic Dream, lots of obviously My Dying Bride and early Anathema, bits of Into the Pandemoniumisms as well, I think. Lots of delicate shimmering tones, and maybe he's onto something by mentioning, Cocteau Twins and some of that kind of stuff, because there is maybe that type of atmosphere or even some shoegaze kind of elements that are built
the Anathema stuff as well. I would agree with.
There's some shimmering stuff that Anathema always does, but John is particularly restrained on this track, which I think is cool. He's showing some real kind of vocal diversity, and the keyboardist Don really wraps his keys into the heart of the bass and the guitars, while Vince does this like almost like a semi-tribal pattern throughout the song at times with the drums. It's cool. And I said when the song finally burst through the veil at the 7:15 mark, I said it's cathartic bliss. Very cool. I said for me, this album puts them at the number one of this entire genre. So like for me, like this and Hypnagogia puts them over the edge for whatever you want to call it, extreme doom. But that's what we're calling it now. This is it for me. This and Hypnagogia, like it seals the deal.
Yeah, break into the Forever People riff.
Yeah,
which you could never do that enough. You could fucking surprise me every 10 minutes with that riff, and I'd be completely happy.
And again,
there's a little bit of like Paul Bearer isms or things that Paul Bearer would go on to do.
Yeah,
in the that I kind of picked up on that song as well.
Well, even like the solo at the end is like super uplifting.
Yeah,
in a weird way.
Major chord stuff.
Fucking great.
And that's like, I feel like that those are elements that weren't necessarily there before.
I don't think at all.
It's got to be Chris, I can imagine, as part of that equation.
And everybody kind of just
It's hard to say, just because again, it's like you remove the main songwriter, and other people who were there before could potentially step up too. So I can't speak to that process, but it's clear that there's an evolution, and that they're a stronger band within this configuration.
Yeah, absolutely. The song also, I come away like with this woozy feeling from it. And again, maybe it's when I was listening to this last night and kind of writing the notes, but like there's like a kind of a semi-lucid feel that I have in this song. And I mean, it's called Descent into Chaotic Dream, for a reason, but I wrote, the song makes me feel like I just watched like 6 or 7 straight episodes of Twin Peaks season 3. like I've just been on a binge of like Lynchian sort of stuff. And I'm kind of like questioning like reality a little bit, and it's a cool feeling. It's very, like I said, semi-lucid, and I don't do a lot of drugs or anything, so it's like that's how I find my escapes through music sometimes, but yeah, definitely a cool tune and a nice companion piece with Grim Eloquence. I mean, where that song is like less beautiful and it's more like this kind of, I wrote Lovecraftian kind of tension. You can feel this like just cosmic kind of energy.
It's a weird like mix of, symphonic and chaotic.
Yeah. Which I guess if you're trying to represent like the feeling of like the Black Plague, people had such like confused spiritual allusions to what that was, God's punishment, and all these like kind of like existential crisis, like why is God killing me and not others? And
there's that great like weird over modulated flanger Paradise Lost guitar tone that actually it goes into like Cathedral Hooded Menace territory. Yeah, toward the end, which I fucking love. So
yeah, no, it's almost like a glacial, like monolithic, almost like a winter riff at the end too. And there's even some like cool Gregor, like Shades of God, like gothic kind of guitar solo kind of parts at the end, which are pretty cool. It's, I just wrote, this might be the new quintessential Evoken cut, kind of replacing In Pestilence for this kind of new generation of fans that have kind of rediscovered the band. It's great.
It's just it's awesome that a band consecutively gets better every single record. Mm-hmm. And like this far into their, 25 years into the career?
Yeah.
Like I think the last record is the best thing they ever did.
Yeah. It is pretty phenomenal.
To my aesthetic, but it's not I think it's, if they were doing this as something where they had to make money, that would not be the case at all.
Can you think of another band like this, Albert, where they've like almost every release is like a consistently great evolution?
Immolation.
Okay. All right.
There aren't a lot. There aren't a lot of bands that have been around, 25 to 30 years that I think get consistently better every time. Immolation.
And they also have kind of a weird. There's like almost a connection with this band in some ways, like in terms of like some of the funeral suffocating kind of elements that the Immolation's kind of like perfected almost. Even though this is a little bit more like eloquent and beautiful at times,
There's quality accents from both members.
Yeah, absolutely.
Little Jersey, little Yonkers.
Yeah, there you go.
But there aren't a lot with that kind of with that kind of longevity that have that continue the upswing like that. Yeah, Immolation was the first one that came to mind. I mean, I would argue that perhaps to the dismay of some, that Napalm Death are another band that I think has gotten continually better. Maybe there's some ebbs and flows in that catalog, but I do think that like their latest release is one of their best albums ever. But
I'd throw PL in there too, just to be a sycophant. But
I think you could. I think PL and Napalm are probably in that same category where it's a band that has been around forever that is still making consistently great records.
Sure.
Whereas I think it's a rarer thing with Evoken in particular, where here's a band that is making their best music this far in. And I think I also think that's the case with Immolation. I truly do. But it's, I'm trying to think of more examples off the top of my head, and there aren't many. So
it's tough. I mean, you could talk about, like Surgical Steel and some of that, but like you also,
but as far as like every 3 years, a new record too, and you
gotta like throw Swan Song into the mix and kind of like, and we like that record, but it's like,
it's different. Yeah.
I mean, you have a 17-year recording gap. Like that's the thing is like, even
it's not fair.
Even though there's long stretches where Evoken don't record, they're still an active band the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you have any thoughts on either of these two tunes from Atra Moors, or have we said everything? Has Jeff Walker captured all that you wanted to say about
Did it get your panties wet, Albert?
Usually does.
Okay. You can get panties, extra absorbent panties for that.
There
you
go.
But
Comes with age.
Agrim Eloquence. Like, I mean, that's at 9 minutes and 40 seconds. That's the single.
That's
the maxi
hit
single.
Song. Yeah, exactly.
You go to radio with that one. But I think that's like that's definitely that definitely works for me. And if you want to say that kind of is the quintessential song of that period.
Mm-hmm.
I think they definitely played it at the 100th issue show. I don't know how many more times I've seen them play it since then. So I don't know where it ranks for the band and for the devoted fans. I know it's a great one. And
I think John mentions it in one of the clips that we play, where he's like, he doesn't mention a lot of songs, but that's like one that he's like, that's one I'm particularly proud of. So I don't know if he wrote it, but
no, but I don't think I have anything else to add.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it, and then we're going to come out with the title track from their latest record, Hypnagogia, and kind of set that record up. Say our goodbyes to Albert for putting him through 14 hours of punishment, and
we're almost at 15. So
there you go. So we've got Descend to Chaotic Dream, Grim Eloquence, both from the Atra record from 2012. Then we skip ahead 6 years to Hypnagogia, an instrumental tune that we'll talk a little bit more when we come back.
Just to clarify, this Atra, when we made that record, we were already in with all the members on a previous album, except for Chris on guitar. So we're pretty accustomed to having Don and the way he lays his keyboards tracks, the way he creates his keyboard tracks. And that record, we pulled some old riffs out of our vault that we never used from years ago that got into the songs. And Vinny's lyrics and his idea of what the record was about also influenced everything about that record, because once you have something in your head previous to making the songs and creating the artwork and the layout, it really molds how everything's going to come out. So being about the plague, it felt like the plague. We had to make it feel like you were getting affected by the plague and you were dying, and Atra has that weight, and it's vicious and it's beautiful. And my standout track has to be Grim Eloquence. I love the ending, I love the beginning, the middle, everything about it. It's one of my favorite songs to play live.
There was nothing at the time that influenced us to go toward a more melodic direction. You have new members coming into a band, you're always going to have, their own unique influence, bands that they're, really into. And, it brings a new element to the music. Like Chris is a phenomenal melody writer. He's a great player, guitar player, just in general. But the way he comes up with some of these melodies is like incredible. It takes the riff to the next level. So yeah, there wasn't anything I can actually pinpoint to say, well, that had an influence on Atra Morris or that had an influence on Hypnagogia. It's always just getting 5 guys in the room and writing music and letting it happen organically, as opposed to pre-planning or file sharing.
And here we are with our latest record, Hypnagogia. I think that it really isn't too much of a stretch. I don't feel too much of a difference between the previous records and this record. To me, it still sounds like Evoken 100%. There are a few things that I would have done different, but it came out the way it came out, and being that it's a concept record and it feels like almost like a movie soundtrack to me, and I'm doing lines that Vinny fed me, and it's about a soldier's journey, and I feel like that changed things a little bit because it was had more of like a movie feeling to it, like a cinematic feeling. And the songs all blended into one, and it was just a journey for this one person. And I feel that's how it came out.
I've always found events in history where human beings came to the very brink of their own destruction due to their own actions. So you plagues, wars, religious conflicts, you name it. I've always been fascinated by that, but not so much regarding how it came to be, because every war is the same thing. Young men dying, old men arguing. To me, it's the trauma of what's going on inside their mind. The horrors of having to watch people that they became close friends with basically annihilated in front of them. Yes, conditions were deplorable. You had the French army that were so behind as far as military equipment and camouflage and uniforms are. They're walking around in July with wool coats. You just think, what all these elements put together, it's maddening. I'm fascinated that anybody was even able to come away from that war and survive another 5-6 years or more without ending their own life. Because so many of them were younger than 18. And this was a war that was on an industrial scale. And you had monarchies bickering. And you had this promise of, well, you'll never see a world war. Human beings aren't that savage to just start killing each other on a massive scale. So basically it was, join the military, you see the world, meet new friends, be a part of history, and, you'll have the experience. But a lot of them, they found out the hard way once they got in. So to me, the inside scars, the trauma these men suffered is insurmountable. I've always found that the best thing to do when it comes to bringing an atmosphere to something or trying to sonically create those inside scars. I always found that reading notes, reading the actual writing from soldiers themselves serve that purpose to draw from. And that's what I did with Hypnagogia, with the journals, because they were censored, as you know already. As far as the next album and album after that, there's no, I don't have anything planned to use as a concept or what have you. It's all based on the music. Just laying back once all the songs are done, whether it's a rehearsal, what have you, just closing your eyes and listening. And usually I'll get like a flash, like a really quick image, and I just you start feeling, wow, this really feels like it would fit this time period or this event. So I'm actually really surprised the past, ever since Hypnagogia came out, that a lot of people find that interesting. To me, everything was just, people would just go right by it. So yeah, it's cool to see that. But next album, we'll see. We'll see what we can do.
All right, that was Hypnagogia, Grim Eloquence, and Descent into Chaotic Dream, which is where we'll all be descending soon. I imagine. I mean, we've said it. We've all hinted at it. But for me, and I think Mark shares these sentiments. I'm sure Albert, you're somewhere in this. But this might be my favorite record from them, because it's strangely enough almost nice to listen to, as you just heard there with the title track, and as you heard with the Fear After at the beginning of the show, that it's like a warmer listen. And even John kind of talks about it, that he kind of feels like it has like a soundtrack kind of quality to the whole record. Like it's kind
of concept-y, in a way.
But it's just like a pleasant listen. What's that?
It's a war album, right?
Yes.
From a soldier's perspective.
It's their Bolt Thrower album. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bolt Thrower, famous for melodics, makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Totally.
It's definitely the most listenable Evoken. And when I say listenable, it's not in like a
bad way. Yeah.
Accessible.
Not a derogatory way. Yeah.
Yeah, no. And like, I'm when I'm listening to music, I'd prefer it to be listenable. I prefer listenable music over unlistenable music, generally speaking.
Yeah.
So I don't. That's not a negative, like you said. It's not a derogative. No, it's an evolution of what they started with the previous album. It makes complete sense to me that they would kind of continue to reshape and refine that direction, because I mean I'm not saying that they generally work in pairs in the way that Paradise Lost does. And Paradise Lost traditionally will admit, at least Greg will, that when they are writing albums stylistically, they kind of work in pairs. And to me, Antithesis and Caress of the Void are a pair, and Atra and Moros and Hypnagogia are a pair. I don't know what that portends to the next record in 5 more years. Could they just kind of continue to refine this style? Of course, because because they clearly have hit a sweet spot that most bands don't get to experience. So yeah, no, it is. I don't know. I mean, we've been talking about Evoken for 5 hours now.
I know.
Closer to 7.
But I think you've got these elements too, where flutes are showing up. Like you heard a little bit in that title track there. There's Don is at his best on the keyboards all over the place.
Right.
They even bring in Shalini Williams to do some female vocals on Ceremony of Bleeding. Brian Sanders is doing cello throughout. They're just really putting on this full piece of bringing all these extra elements in to just add these kind of extra layers and stuff. And yeah, speaking of the concept, Vince will talk a lot about it in one of the audio clips, but I found in the Uncle Acid cover to Decibel, you guys Dutch Pierce did a kind of interview with Vince, and they were kind of talking about it. And they said, Hypnagogia stands apart from the rest of the Evoken catalog in numerous ways, but for all its differences, there's no denying that the album is theirs and theirs alone. Perhaps the biggest distinction is that it's a concept album that pulls inspiration from World War I. The lyrics are based on one fictional soldier wounded in battle and spending his final hours recording his thoughts in a journal. But the concept goes even deeper than that. Bitter about dying so young, the soldier makes a deal with a sadistic god that allows him to leave a remnant of his soul, which contains all of his suffering. Within his journal, the rest of the concept, according to Verkey, is that, quote, anyone who reads the journal releases that part of his soul, and it attaches itself to the reader like a host, each emotion being experienced as if they too were there. And Dutch says, sounds familiar, right? Kind of like listening to an Evoken album. And then Vince goes on and says, there are so many layers underneath what is seen and heard on the surface. The lyrics provide a setting, but are used as a metaphor. Sometimes fans enjoy what they hear and read at its face value, something to build on and let their imagination bring you to a place of incredible human suffering. On the surface, it's a way for fans to escape from everyday life. It's a way for someone to experience the same emotional swing these men who fought in World War I endured. Maybe someone close has recently passed away. Music can allow people to express emotions in a private setting. Think of Hypnagogia as a journey through stages of grieving. The most important thing is there's no wrong or right. It's just what each person experiences from it. To me, once an album is released, it's no longer ours. It belongs to those who listen to and enjoy it. I just think that's so eloquently put of like what you can kind of get out of an Evoken album. Maybe that's kind of what I was hinting at before with like, you know, Grim Eloquence and Descent into Chaotic Dream, that I just get these like raw emotions out of it a little bit. And I don't know, just
even if it's more like quote unquote listenable,
sure,
you still get, there's like even more, I think there's more behind it. There's more meaning and, you know, behind all the lyrics and intent of the record, but it's somehow more digestible.
Well, and in particular,
maybe it's just the little bit of melody that's going
well,
on.
And maybe there's an extra added sort of hook there for me, being that I'm a world history teacher and that I spend so much time too on World War I as opposed to World War II, because I feel like it gets kind of the short shrift sometimes.
Well, that's been we've talked about this, at least this might be the fourth time we've brought up World War I
slightly
in depth about World War I, because it's like this war where you don't necessarily know exactly why it happened.
And I think the people fighting it didn't know why it happened either. And that's part of like what
intrigue,
what Vince is kind of talking about in terms of like this existential crisis of a guy dying, going, what the fuck did I just do here? You know, in the trenches and
beginning
some
of
of
trench
that
warfare. And
absolutely. This industrialized, inhumane kind of thing. And Vince will talk a lot about that in one of the sound clips you'll hear, where he goes really in depth into it, even more than that interview clip I just kind of read from Decibel there.
Ask Albert real quickly. Has Vince always been the lyrical writer of the band, as far as you know?
As far as I know, he's kind of had that vision of where they're kind of going. But you know, again, it's Nick was a driving force with the music for many, many years. But I would say from the moment that he left, it's really been Vince and John's band.
Okay.
And I think that there is probably a pretty equal distribution of like how they, of their vision for the band, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cause if you look at the credits, it's always like, you know, music, lyric, like everything's by Evoken. It's very like democratic, but
it seems like in the interviews that I've kind of come across in my research, it seems like Vince always seems to talk more about the stories and some of that kind of stuff.
I always like where it's the drummer or the
like Geezer for Sabbath writing all the lyrics,
or
and
like
stuff
Neil
that.
Peart or something for Rush. Like it's interesting to have somebody who's not singing the lyrics, or even I know Albert's not a huge fan, but like Anthrax, like Scott Ian doing lyrics,
doing a lot for Joey or for other people. Yeah,
not as much for Mr. Bush, but
that is correct. Not a huge fan.
It's all right. We won't say that out loud too much. Okay. But like in terms of lyrics too, the song we're going to end with, the reason why I picked this is it's the album closer for the record, and so it's an appropriate way to kind of end the show. But I was kind of drawn to the lyrics a little bit, and maybe it's the school teacher part of me, but it's the Weald of Perished Men, and it's kind of almost like a short little poem, and it kind of reminds me of A lot of the German expressionists like poems that were sort of coming out in the 1920s reflecting on the war. And here's what the lyrics to the song are. It says, whispers, it all can end. Carnage never chooses sides. Will they ever find me then? Will I have a next of kin? The hypnotic voice can lead you to a certain end. Sacrifice is fine, waiting to be blessed by the tyrant's hand, sending us the chosen few. Just as the anticipation grew, I knew it was them or I. So clear, so real. I see the river. I feel a shiver. Slow end, slow fall. Here it comes. Here it stands. It's here, the end. Please let me go. Please let me die. Please let me go. Please let me go. And it's like
fucking Injustice for All lyrics.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, whoa. And and I don't know what was inspiring Vince. Clearly, he seems to be, based on the last couple of records, a little bit of a history buff, or at least somebody that has kind of a vested interest. But just to give you sort of an example, kind of a German expressionist poet that I've kind of used this poem before in my classes. His name's Jomar Forst, and it's called To a Wounded Frenchman. It's very short, but it sounds very similar to the Weald of Perished Men. It says, glistening gold at sundown, carried by the drunkenness of brotherhood. It was me who babbled enraptured words. I'm getting cross-eyed. The fern glowed and my heart blood surged for you bleeding, nailed to the cross like him. Blood drenched, we crept into the darkening fields of sunbrooks, knowing their submergence gives way to distant drinking of circling stars. Your silence screamed like blood from my shield. That's like very metal, very kind of captures the same sentiment of what I think, Vince's lyrics are doing throughout this record and stuff, this sort of inhumanity of man and the existential crisis that everybody faces in war, especially this war, and I thought that's this, and the song really itself musically kind of builds to that too, when it finally builds to that drum fill that Vince does at like 640, it's such a visceral emotional release for the characters in the story that he's telling and for the listener, I think. And it's a very appropriate way to kind of go out with all this. And you don't hear from him very often, but I did get a quote from Don, the keyboardist. He just said, for me, this album is even more free than Atra Moore's. I think we push the boundaries of our expected output a bit further, challenge ourselves, and hopefully the listeners too. And I think
I've listened to this album more than anything else they've ever done.
Yeah. And for somebody like me, and Albert knows how much I bug him about Anathema, there's just a real Pentecost 3 serenades kind of worship in this song too. Yeah. Just in terms of the atmosphere and stuff. So it's
Albert, did you drop off of Anathema after Darren White? Or were you never?
No, I'm not that
on board.
I'm not that asshole. No.
Oh, okay.
I think I'm with them. I'm with them further than you think. Like I hung on to geez. What's the
Judgment, or is that too far?
I like Judgment. I like
Find Date Exit.
Alternative
Find Date Exit. Natural Disaster is where it starts to come apart a little bit. Like
okay.
And then when they come back as
that's kind of a lot of people kind of ending. You think Coldplay? I think more like a Pink Floyd, Porcupine Tree kind of thing. No. That's what they're coming back as.
I think Find Day might be the last one what was the one after
Natural Disaster?
Natural Disaster.
I like Natural Disaster too.
Everything in Natural Disaster on they're just like kind of a rock band.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Except for those blast beats they do at the end of Natural Disaster. You remember that? Just out of nowhere, some blast beats. I think in that Violence
weird,
too.
Isn't it? Yeah. No, yeah. It's all those records.
I don't pull them out as much as you think I probably do. I'll be honest with you. There's a few songs I listen to here and there.
Yeah, they just kind of bleed together.
They do, yeah. You could kind of make a really good compilation of like the best songs from like those last 4 or 5 and probably have a pretty killer record, but there's a lot of filler in there too.
My favorite is Pentecost 3.
Yeah, it's a good record.
So, weird EP with covers and beat, whatever, but
I'm probably tried and true a Judgment and Find Date Exit guy, just because I was interviewing Vincent then, so I felt kind of personally connected both to where he was at. Like that was like a point where like Mark and I were listening to a lot of Nick Drake and Jeff Buckley, and he was talking about those being like big influences, and Jonas was talking about those, and I was like, oh shit, Catatonia and Anathema are like on the same like indie rock journey that I am, trying to expand my horizons. And I don't know. I think I've always felt most personally connected to those two bands for that reason, maybe.
But yeah, I was the guy that jumped and I was a Blood Divine guy.
Oh, well, the Blood Divine's fine.
You know,
It's fun.
Darren's my boy, so
How'd this devolve into an anathema
I just
conversation?
had to ask.
I don't know,
Okay. God,
but
I blame Mark for that shit.
I have at least one serotonal record if we want to get like full on Darren White.
Which one?
Serotonal. That's the band that he's in, that he fronts like post Blood Divine.
Okay.
Oh shit, I didn't even know.
Yeah,
that
I don't
existed,
think I
so.
had that. I do have some antimatter. I think that's Duncan's
That's
stuff.
Duncan.
Okay.
You
Yeah.
want Darren White, you need serotonal.
Okay. There you go, Mark. That's
All right.
You gotta write that shit
Serotonal
down.
and Sadness. Don't forget about Sadness from like 8 hours ago.
Oh, yeah. Sadness.
No, I've got it.
Yeah, he's
It's in
got
my
written down.
Discogs thing right now.
Well, Albert, it has been wonderful. Sorry to have put you through the trials of Hercules, but you made it through all of them, and here we are at the end
Hercules
of this Evoken epic Doom podcast. So
Now, if it's Evoken, it better be fucking epic. So
it's going to be fucking. It's going
If
to be
it wasn't
long.
6 hours,
yeah,
then
exactly.
what
It's
the
as
hell is it
long
worth?
as Evoken songs are. So, as John said earlier, what's the record? He said he has trouble. Antithesis of Light. It's kind of like listening to that back to back, but like 4 times in a row. So
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to do to our listeners here.
While
But,
you're trying to get your kids not to play with knives.
yeah, exactly. But thank you for doing this once again. I'm glad
Yeah, it was
I
great.
finally kind of talked you into to doing all this stuff, and we do appreciate you keeping. I know you're a dad, so you probably don't stay up this late during the week like we
Not
do.
so much.
So we do appreciate that, and yeah, we'll be in touch on some other things, and let's at least have a free beverage when we see each other in September.
We'll do some high fives and talk about Darren White.
There you go.
We will. I'll bring some serotonal CDRs if I can find a blank.
Maybe you can make some.
Yeah, we'll
for us,
keep bugging you about it so you don't forget.
I'm into
So.
it. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's a pleasure as always.
Yep. Anything else to plug away that you want people to sort of tune in who have made it to the end of this podcast? Some like special 20% off code from Decibel. Like, thank you for making it through a 6-hour Evoken podcast.
Holy
Here you
shit,
go.
They really deserve something, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have anything to give them other than just be like, try to go find some Evoken records and buy
Yeah. Gratitude and
Go to Discogs and
there you go.
keep the capitalism going.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you again, Albert. We appreciate it, and have a good night.
Yeah, you too, guys.
All right, take care, brother.
Thanks.
All right, man. Bye.
Bye.
The last decade or so, our guitar player Nick has left the band, and we got Chris Molinari to play guitar for us. And he's very melodic in nature. His guitar playing is very beautiful, I would say, like compared to like Andy LaRock from King Diamond. So that became part of our sound also. And then with Don Zaros on keyboards, his playing also was melodic. But I try to keep it, as heavy as it always was with my riffs. But it just became what it was, and that's how Evoken evolved. And we're gonna keep going in this direction because it feels natural, and but we're still gonna be dark and heavy. Here we are at the end of the interview, and you want to know how I feel about Evoken's future. I think that we still have a lot of music to write. Still a lot of life left in us. So we haven't burnt ourselves out with releasing too many records back to back to back. So we still have a lot of room, a lot of thoughts, a lot of riffs. And we're going to come back. I don't know how much longer it's going to take to make this new record. But we're not going away, and the new album's going to feel heavy, oppressive, dark, all the elements that make Evoken what it is. And I just want to thank you guys for this opportunity, and hopefully I didn't bore any of you guys with my answers. Take it easy.
Good question. You know more than I do. It's something that any time we write, it's organic. We've always said since day one, no compromise, and that doesn't just mean playing, shorter songs or lighter songs. It's keeping yourself engaged, not painting yourself into a corner, while still maintaining the message that the band was formed around. So as far as like the next album material, where is it going? As far as is it going more melodic? Is it going back to like a darker, slower setting? I guess you can call it, for lack of a better word. We'll see. We never pre-plan. There's never any purpose to trying to come up with let's make this album grind doom. It's whatever comes out, whatever fits, and being careful not to just continuously repeat ourselves. The ultimate goal is to sound like Evoken, to be Evoken. That's who we are. So once the material starts being written, it'll take different directions and go, it'll have its peaks and valleys. But in the end, it's right now I have no fucking clue.